Ambassador Veltar stood at the viewing port of his small diplomatic ship, watching Earth's orbital station grow larger against the backdrop of the blue and green planet below. His forearms trembled slightly as he gripped the metal railing. Never in his 300 years of life had he imagined he would come to this place, begging for help from the species his people called savages. The Zilani had always considered themselves superior to most other races in the galaxy. Their technology was advanced, their culture refined, and their philosophy centered on peace and order. They had built a confederation of 12 different species, all living in harmony under Zilani guidance. War was something they had left behind thousands of years ago, but the Korthok Empire had changed everything. Veltar closed his large eyes and tried not to think about the images that haunted his sleep. Entire worlds burning, cities full of civilians turned to ash, his own daughter's voice on the emergency transmission, cut short by static and silence. The Korthok moved like a plague across the galaxy, consuming everything in their path. Docking tube connected with a soft thud, and Veltar straightened his ceremonial robes. He had to maintain some dignity, even in these desperate times. The airlock opened, and he stepped into the human station. The first thing that struck him was the smell. Not unpleasant, but different from the sterile, filtered air of Zilani ships. There was something organic about it, something alive. The second thing was the gravity. Earth's gravity was heavier than his homeworld. He could feel the extra weight pressing down on his thin frame. 2 humans in military uniforms waited. For him, the male was tall and broad-shouldered, with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The female was smaller, but carried herself with the same alert confidence. Both wore weapons at their sides, something that would have been unthinkable in Zilani space. Ambassador Veltar, the male human said, extending his hand in the strange, human greeting ritual. I'm Captain Jake Morrison, and this is Commander Lisa Hayes. Welcome to Terra Station. Veltar awkwardly shook the offered hand, noting how firm the grip was. Human skin was rougher than Zilani's skin, marked with small scars and calluses. These were hands that had seen work in conflict. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Veltar said, his voice translation device converting his musical Zilani speech into flat human words. I know our species have had limited contact in the past. Captain Morrison's expression didn't change, but Veltar caught something in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps. Or maybe contempt. The human simply nodded and gestured down the corridor. Admiral Clark is waiting for us in the conference room. He's eager to hear what brought you all this way from Zilani space. As they walked through the station, Veltar tried not to stare at the humans they passed. They came in different sizes and colors, but all of them moved with a predatory grace that made him nervous. Even the smaller ones looked like they could break him without effort. Their eyes followed him as he passed, curious but not unfriendly. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, though built with a brutality of purpose that Zilani architects would never consider. Everything was functional, efficient, designed for war. Weapon systems were visible everywhere. Veltar could see military personnel conducting drills through the transparent walls of training chambers. The conference room was simple, but impressive, with a large table surrounded by chairs clearly built for human proportions. Admiral Ben Clark sat at the head of the table, a gray-haired man with weathered skin and scars on his hands. His uniform was covered with ribbons and medals that Veltar didn't recognize but assumed represented various military achievements. Ambassador Admiral Clark said, rising to shake hands. Please sit down. Can we offer you anything? Water? Food? Thank you. No, Veltar replied, settling into the oversized chair. I appreciate your time, Admiral. I know humans are busy with your own concerns. We're never too busy to listen to a neighbor in trouble, Clark said smoothly. Though I have to admit, this is the first time the Zilani Confederation has requested a meeting with us. Your people haven't exactly been eager for human contact. In the past, Veltar felt his face flush with embarrassment. It was true. When humans had first achieved interstellar travel 50 years ago, the Zilani had been among the voices arguing against contact. They had called humans dangerous, unpredictable, violent. The fact that humans came from a death world where almost everything was trying to kill them had only reinforced these prejudices. Yes, Veltar admitted. We have been. Cautious about human expansion, perhaps too cautious. Commander Hayes leaned forward. What's changed, Ambassador? What brought you here now? Veltar activated his data pad and projected a holographic display above the table. The image showed a star map of the galaxy, with different colored regions representing various species and empires. A large section of what had once been Zilani territory was now colored in angry red. The Korthok Empire, Veltar said simply. They appeared in our outer systems 8 months ago. Thought they were raiders at first, just another small, aggressive species looking for easy targets. We were wrong. The red section pulsed, and the humans could see how it had grown larger over time, consuming system after system. They're not like other aggressive species, Veltar continued. They don't want to conquer and rule, they want to consume. They strip worlds of resources, eliminate all native life, and move on. They've already destroyed 4 of our member worlds completely. Billions of civilians, gone. Captain Morrison studied the display with professional interest. What's their technology like? Ship design, weapons, tactics. Superior to ours in raw power, Veltar admitted. Their ships are larger, their weapons more destructive. But it's their strategy that makes them truly dangerous. They move in massive fleets, overwhelming any defense we can mount. They don't negotiate. They don't take prisoners. They don't even communicate. They just destroy everything in their path. Admiral Clark exchanged glances with his officers. And your own military forces? Veltar's shoulders slumped. We've lost 60% of our fleet. Our remaining ships are scattered, trying to protect civilian populations. Our military was designed for peacekeeping and defense against raiders, not for total war against an enemy like this. Right. What about your allies? Commander Hayes asked. The other major powers in the galaxy? The Altarian Republic is too far away. And dealing with their own border conflicts? The Nexus Council is debating whether to get involved, but their decision-making process could take years. The hegemony. Veltar made a gesture of disgust. They've closed their borders and declared neutrality. So you come to the humans, Admiral Clark said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Veltar's voice was barely above a whisper. We come to the humans. The species we called savages and Deathworlders, ones we said were too violent to join civilized society. He looked directly at Clark. We need your help, Admiral. Without it, the Zilani Confederation will cease to exist within the year. The room fell silent for a long moment. Veltar could hear the hum of the station's machinery, the distant sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. The humans seemed to be having some kind of silent conversation, exchanging looks that conveyed meaning he couldn't interpret. Finally, Admiral Clark spoke. The Korthok Empire has been on our radar for some time, Ambassador. We've been watching their expansion. With interest? Then you'll help us? Veltar asked, hope creeping into his voice. That depends, Commander Hayes said. What exactly are you asking for? Military assistance? Your fleet, your soldiers, your expertise in warfare? We can offer payment, of course. Technology, resources, trade agreements. Payment isn't the issue, Clark said. The question is authority. If Earth commits to helping you fight the Korthok, we need to know that our commanders will have the freedom to fight effectively. War isn't a democracy, Ambassador. It requires clear command structure and decisive action. Veltar felt a chill run through him. What are you saying? I'm saying that if we're going to risk human lives to save your people, we need operational control of the war effort, human commanders. Human strategy. Human rules of engagement. Your people can advise and support, but the military decisions would be ours. The ambassadors for arms began to tremble again. This was worse than he had feared, not just asking for help, but surrendering control of their own defense to aliens. The Zilani Council would be horrified, but then he thought of his daughters. Voice cut short by static. Of the billions of civilians already dead, of the world still burning, how long do you need to mobilize? He asked quietly. Admiral Clark smiled, and for the first time Veltar saw something predatory in the expression. Our expeditionary fleet is already prepared, Ambassador. We've been ready to move for weeks. The only question was whether anyone would ask for our help. Then yes, Veltar said, his voice stronger now. Yes, we accept your terms. Save our people, Admiral, please. As the humans began discussing deployment schedules and supply lines, Veltar stared out the viewport at the blue and green world below. He had come here to ask for salvation, and the humans had agreed to provide it. He just hoped the price wouldn't be higher than the Korthok conquest itself. The human fleet arrived at the Zilani homeworld of Azuria 3 weeks after Ambassador Veltar's meeting with Admiral Clark. General Paul Davis stood on the bridge of the battleship Terra's Wrath, watching the planet grow larger on the main screen. What he saw made his jaw tighten with anger. 3 massive Korthok fleets hung in orbit around Azuria like vultures circling a dying animal. Their dark ships formed perfect blockade formations, cutting off all supply routes to the planet. Below, intelligence reports said the Korthok had been slowly starving the population for 2 months, turning the siege into a form of psychological warfare. General called out Lieutenant Colonel Sam Mitchell from the communications station. Receiving a transmission from the Zilani Planetary Defense Command, they're asking for our battle plan. Davis almost smiled. The Zilani were still thinking in terms of traditional warfare, where opposing fleets would meet in open space and exchange fire until one side retreated or was destroyed. They had no idea what humans were actually planning. Tell them we'll coordinate. With their forces once we're ready, Davis replied. But make it clear that human units operate under human command only. Colonel Amy Thompson approached the general, her tablet showing detailed scans of the Korthok fleet positions. She was a small woman with short red hair and sharp green eyes. But Davis had seen her plan battles that made enemy commanders surrender rather than face her tactics. Sir, I've identified the weak points in their formation, she said, pointing to the display. The Korthok are using standard siege protocols. They're positioned to intercept any ships trying to break through to the planet, but they're not expecting anyone to come after them directly. Boarding actions? Davis asked. Boarding actions, Thompson confirmed. Hit them hard and fast before they can react. Take their command ships and turn their own weapons against them. Davis nodded. This was why humans had become feared across the galaxy. Other species fought wars with honor, following ancient traditions and established rules. Humans fought wars to win, using whatever methods worked best. Signal the fleet. He ordered, all assault units prepare for boarding operations. Tell Captain Foster to have her engineers ready with the special equipment. Captain Maya Foster was already suiting up in the engineering bay when the order came through. Around her, dozens of human soldiers were checking their weapons and armor, preparing for the kind of close-quarters combat that made other species nervous. Maya wasn't a soldier by training, but she had volunteered for this mission because she understood something that the Zilani didn't. Humans could turn anything into a weapon. Listen up, she called out to her team. We've got 47 Korthok. Heavy cruisers in the outer formation. Intel says they're built for long-range combat, which means their interior corridors are going to be narrow and cramped. Perfect for us, nightmare for them. Sergeant Rick Palmer, a veteran of the Titan colony conflicts, raised his hand. What about their crew complements, Captain? Korthok average about 2 meters tall, but they're built for strength, not speed. They're also used to fighting in formation, not individual combat. Once we're inside their ships, we'll have every advantage. Maya activated a holographic display showing the interior layout of a typical Korthok vessel. These ships are designed like hives, with central command areas and branching corridors. We're going to hit them in teams of 6, move fast, and focus on taking their bridge and engineering sections. What about their weapons, ma'am? Asked another soldier. Standard energy weapons designed for open combat, they'll be useless in their own corridors. We stick to kinetic weapons and explosives. Remember, we're not trying to destroy these ships. We're trying to capture them. The first wave of human assault shuttles launched 20 minutes later. The Korthok fleet, expecting a traditional space battle, was caught completely off guard when dozens of small PL ships streaked directly toward their vessels instead of forming up for a fleet engagement. General. Davis watched the tactical display. As his boarding teams made contact with the enemy ships, each dot on the screen represented a human assault team cutting through. Korthok coal-plating and fighting their way toward critical ship systems. First team has reached the bridge of the lead cruiser, reported Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell. Resistance is lighter than expected. Davis wasn't surprised. The Korthok were excellent fleet commanders, but they had never faced an enemy that would board their ships in the middle of battle. Their training and tactics were designed for ship-to-ship combat, not for defending against invaders inside their own vessels. "Sir," called out the communications officer, "we're getting reports from multiple boarding teams. The Korthok seem to be abandoning their posts and falling back to defensive positions." "They're regrouping," Davis realized. "Signal all teams to move faster. Don't give them time to organize a proper defense." On board the Korthok heavy cruiser designation KX-7741, Sergeant Palmer and his team were learning exactly why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most feared warriors. The corridors of the alien ship were indeed narrow and cramped, forcing the large Korthok soldiers to move in single file, while the smaller, more agile humans could maneuver freely. "Contact front," Palmer called out as his team rounded a corner and came face to face with a group of Korthok defenders. The aliens were impressive looking, with thick armored shells and multiple arms ending in sharp claws, but they were designed for open battlefields, not corridor fighting. Palmer's team moved like they had trained together for years, which they had. Two soldiers provided covering fire while the others flanked the enemy position. The Korthok's energy weapons were powerful but slow to recharge, giving the humans time to close distance and use their superior mobility. Within minutes, the corridor was clear, and Palmer's team was moving toward the ship's bridge. They passed through sections of the vessel that looked more like a biological organism than a machine, with walls that seemed to pulse with their own life and lighting that shifted color based on the ship's operational status. "This is weird," muttered one of Palmer's soldiers as they passed through what looked like a medical bay. "It's like they grow their ships instead of building them." "Focus on the mission," Palmer replied, but he privately agreed. The Korthok technology was unlike anything in human databases. It was advanced, but in a way that seemed completely alien to human thinking. They reached the bridge to find it abandoned, except for one Korthok officer, who was desperately trying to destroy the ship's computer systems before the humans could capture them. Palmer's team stunned the alien and quickly moved to secure the bridge. "Bridge secured," Palmer reported into his comm unit. "We've got access to their navigation and communication systems." "Excellent work, Sergeant," came General Davis's voice. "Hold position and wait for the tech teams." Similar scenes were playing out across the Korthok fleet as human boarding teams systematically captured ship after ship. The aliens had never faced an enemy that would risk everything on close-quarters combat, and their tactics had no answer for human aggression and adaptability. Captain Sters. Engineering teams arrived on the captured ships and immediately began the work of turning Korthok technology against its creators. The aliens had built their ships with sophisticated security systems. They had never considered that an enemy might try to use their own vessels against them. "It's like they never heard of computer security," Foster reported to General Davis. "Their systems are designed to prevent outside interference. But once you're inside the ship, you have access to everything." "Can you turn their weapons on the remaining fleet?" Davis asked. "Already working on it, sir. Give me another hour and I'll have a dozen Korthok cruisers firing on their own people." On the planet below, the Zilani defense commanders watched in amazement as the human assault unfolded. They had expected a traditional fleet battle that would last for days or weeks. Dead, they were watching the Korthok blockade collapse in a matter of hours. "How are they doing this?" asked Defense Coordinator Naltara, staring at the tactical display. "They're fighting inside enemy ships. That's suicide." "Not for humans," replied Ambassador Veltar, who was watching the battle from the planetary command center. "Remember, they come from a death world. They're used to fighting in impossible conditions." As the hours passed, more and more Korthok ships fell under human control. The aliens tried to adapt their tactics, stealing off sections of their vessels and using their own security systems against the boarding teams. But the humans seemed to have an answer for every defensive measure. The turning point came when Captain Foster's team successfully took control of a Korthok dreadnought and turned its massive weapons on the remaining enemy fleet. The sight of their own flagship firing on them broke the Korthok formation, and the surviving ships began to retreat. reported Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell. "The Korthok fleet is breaking off. They're jumping to hyperspace." General Davis allowed himself a small smile. "Signal all units. Phase 1 is complete. Begin Phase 2. "What's Phase 2, sir?" asked Colonel Thompson. "We establish permanent human command posts on all liberated worlds," Davis replied. "We're going to make sure the Korthok can never threaten this system again." 6 months after the first human victory at Azuria, the war against the Korthok Empire had turned into something the galaxy had never seen before. Major Tony Clark crouched in the darkness of a Korthok breeding facility on the planet Vex Prime, watching his Special Forces team prepare for an operation that would have horrified the Zilani leadership if they knew about it. The facility stretched 4 kilometers underground, filled with the sounds of thousands of Korthok larvae growing in their communal chambers. This was the heart of the Korthok Empire, where new soldiers were born and connected to the hive mind that controlled their entire species. "Remember," Clark whispered into his comm unit, "we're not here to destroy anything. We're here to introduce our little gift to their communication network." His team carried small devices that looked harmless, but contained something far more dangerous than explosives. Dr. Helen Rogers, a xenobiologist who had been studying Korthok prisoners for months, had developed a biological agent that would disrupt the mental connections between individual Korthok and their hive mind. "Agent is ready for deployment," reported Corporal Steve Murphy, the team's technical specialist. "Dr. Rogers says it will take about 3 hours to spread through their entire communication system." Clark nodded and signaled his team to move forward. The Korthok guards were focused on external threats, never imagining that humans would infiltrate their most sacred breeding grounds. The aliens had learned to fear human ships and human soldiers, but they still thought in terms of conventional warfare. 3 star systems away, Admiral Ben Clark sat in his command center aboard the Terra's Wrath, reviewing reports from dozens of human units scattered across former Korthok territory. The war was going better than anyone had expected, but success was bringing new challenges. Admiral said Commander Lisa Hayes, approaching with a datapad full of intelligence reports, receiving surrender offers from Korthok fleet commanders in the Outer Ring sectors. "They're willing to discuss terms." Clark looked up from his holographic display showing the current positions of all human and allied forces. "What kind of terms?" "Territorial concessions. They're offering to withdraw from all Zilani space and pay reparations for the damage they've caused. In exchange, they want us to stop our advance into their core systems." The Admiral was quiet for a moment, studying the strategic map. The Korthok Empire had been the dominant military power in this region of the galaxy for over a century. They had conquered dozens of species and controlled hundreds of worlds. Now they were offering to surrender territory and pay reparations to humans they had never heard of a year ago. "Send a message to their fleet commanders," Clark said finally. "Tell them we don't negotiate with species that commit genocide. They can surrender unconditionally, or we can finish destroying them. Those are their only options." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Sir, that's a pretty harsh position. The Zilani leadership has been asking about peace negotiations. They think we've accomplished our mission." "The Zilani leadership doesn't understand the bigger picture," Clark replied. "The Korthok Empire has been terrorizing this part of the galaxy for generations. If we let them retreat to their core worlds and rebuild, they'll be back in 20 years. The only way to ensure lasting peace is to make sure they can never threaten anyone again." Back on Vex Prime, Major Clark's team had successfully infiltrated the Korthok Communications Center. The biological agent was already spreading through their network, and the effects were becoming visible. Korthok soldiers were stumbling around in confusion, cut off from the hive mind that had guided their actions since birth. "It's working," reported Corporal Murphy. "Their entire command structure is breaking down. Individual Korthok don't know how to function without constant direction from the hive mind." Clark watched through his scope as Korthok guards abandoned their posts and wandered aimlessly through the facility. Some were trying to communicate with each other, but without their mental connection, they seemed barely able to coordinate simple tasks. "Phase 2, Clark ordered. "Begin psychological operations." His team activated speakers throughout the facility that began broadcasting recordings of Korthok surrender messages. The recordings had been created by Dr. Rogers using captured Korthok communication protocols designed to convince the confused aliens that their empire had already fallen and resistance was useless. The effect was immediate and devastating. Korthok soldiers began laying down their weapons and gathering in groups, waiting for instructions that would never come. Within hours, the entire facility had surrendered without firing a single shot. Dr. Helen Rogers reviewed the reports from Vex Prime with satisfaction. Her psychological warfare techniques were proving more effective than conventional weapons. The Korthok Empire was built on the principle of absolute unity and shared consciousness. Take away that unity, and the entire structure collapsed. The beauty of it, she explained to her research team, is that we're not killing them. We're just making it impossible for them to function as a military force. Individual Korthok are actually quite peaceful when they're not being controlled by the hive mind. Her assistant, Dr. Kevin Brown, looked uncomfortable. But isn't this a form of mental manipulation? We're essentially lobotomizing an entire species. Rogers shrugged. They chose to make war on the galaxy. We're just removing their ability to do it again. Korthok will survive, but they'll never be able to threaten other species. I call that a victory for galactic peace. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Mitchell was overseeing the occupation of conquered Korthok worlds when he received new orders from Earth Command. The instructions were detailed and specific, covering everything from the administration of captured territories to the establishment of permanent security protocols. Sir, said his aide, Captain Julie Adams, these orders are quite extensive. It looks like we're planning to stay here permanently. Mitchell nodded as he read through the documents. Earth was establishing what they called protective administrations on every world they liberated from Korthok control. These administrations would ensure that the local populations remained peaceful and that former Korthok territories could never again become a source of galactic instability. It makes sense, Mitchell told his staff. The Korthok Empire didn't appear overnight. It took them centuries to build their military power. If we just leave after defeating them, someone else will eventually take their place. By maintaining a presence here, we prevent future conflicts. Back on Azuria, Ambassador Veltar was beginning to understand the true scope of human ambitions. Colonel Amy Thompson had requested a meeting to discuss ongoing security requirements for the Zilani Confederation. The human officer sat across from him in the conference room that had once been used only for Zilani government meetings. Ambassador, Thompson said, her voice professional but firm, Earth Command has completed its assessment of regional security needs. We need to discuss some necessary adjustments to our current arrangements. Veltar felt a chill run through him. What kind of adjustments? 8. Thompson activated a holographic display showing the Zilani Confederation and surrounding space. Dozens of red dots marked human military installations that had been established throughout Zilani territory. First, we need permanent basing rights for human forces. The Korthok threat may be neutralized, but other hostile species in the region could see Zilani space as an easy target if we withdraw our protection. How permanent? Veltar asked. Indefinite. We're talking about full military bases with support facilities, not temporary outposts. We'll also need oversight of your defense, procurement, and strategic planning to ensure compatibility with human systems. Veltar stared at the display. The red dots represented human bases on nearly every major world in the Confederation. And, if we refuse, Thompson's expression didn't change. Ambassador, your people asked for our help because you couldn't defend yourselves against the Korthok. What makes you think you could defend yourselves against us? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Veltar realized with growing horror that he was no longer negotiating with an ally. He was receiving terms from a conqueror. Azers. More, Thompson continued. Earth also requires preferential trading status with all Confederation worlds. We've invested significant resources in your defense, and we need to ensure those investments are protected. You're talking about economic control of our worlds, Veltar said quietly. I'm talking about partnership, Thompson corrected. A partnership where Earth provides security and the Confederation provides cooperation. It's really quite simple. Veltar looked at the holographic display again, seeing his people's independence disappearing beneath a web of human military bases and trade agreements. What about our own government? The Confederation Council? will continue to operate normally, of course. We just need to ensure that all major decisions are coordinated with Earth Command for security purposes. Think of it as a joint administration. After Thompson left, Veltar sat alone in the conference room, staring at the display that showed human bases throughout his people's territory. He had come to Earth begging for salvation from the Korthok Empire. The humans had delivered exactly what he had asked for. They had also delivered something he hadn't expected: the end of Zilani independence. 1 year after the final Korthok surrender, the galaxy expected the human fleets to return to Earth. Instead, Admiral Ben Clark stood before the Galactic Council on the neutral station of Harmony Prime, announcing the creation of something that would change everything. The Terran Peacekeeping Authority is now operational, Clark declared to the assembled representatives of 47 different species. After careful consideration of the galactic security situation, Earth has decided to take responsibility for preventing future conflicts like the Korthok War. The council chamber erupted in shocked voices, speaking dozens of different languages. Councillor Zextai of the Regelian Assembly stood up, his blue skin flushed with anger. Admiral, no single species has the right to declare itself the guardian of galactic peace. The council has existed for 3,000 years to mediate conflicts between species. Clark's expression remained calm. And how well did the council handle the Korthok situation, Counselor? How many billions died while you debated whether to act? Earth responded to a request for help and ended a war that could have consumed half the galaxy. From his seat in the observer section, Ambassador Veltar watched the debate with growing dread. He had seen this pattern before during the war itself. The humans would present their actions as reasonable responses to necessary situations, but the result was always increased human control. The authority will maintain peacekeeping fleets in key strategic locations, Clark continued. We'll also provide security consultation to any species that requests it, and mediation services for disputes that could lead to armed conflict. Councillor Daravan of the Centauri Federation raised her hand. What gives Earth the authority to make these decisions unilaterally? Military capability, Clark answered simply. Earth now controls the largest and most advanced fleet in known space. We have detailed intelligence on every major species' military capabilities. We have proven our ability to end conflicts quickly and decisively. Question isn't whether. We have the authority. The question is whether the galaxy wants our help maintaining peace. Commodore Jake Morrison, now promoted to oversee human operations in the former Korthok sectors, was implementing the Admiral's policies with systematic efficiency. From his command ship, the New Horizon, he coordinated the activities of hundreds of human vessels spread across dozens of star systems. Sir, reported his intelligence officer, Lieutenant Sarah Walsh, we're receiving requests for peacekeeping assistance from the Vegan Trade Union. They're having border disputes with the Tau Ceti Coalition. Morrison studied the tactical display showing the disputed region. The conflict was minor by galactic standards, just two trading partnerships arguing over shipping routes and mineral rights. Under normal circumstances, it would have been resolved through the Galactic Council's mediation process within a few months. Deploy Task Force 7 to the neutral zone, Morrison ordered. Establish a monitoring presence and remind both sides that the authority is committed to peaceful resolution of all disputes. What if they refuse our mediation services? Walsh asked. Morrison's smile was cold. Then we explain the benefits of cooperation using recent examples. I doubt the vegans want to end up like the Korthok. Commander Lisa Hayes reviewed intelligence reports in her office aboard Terra Station, Earth's primary military command center in occupied space. The data showed the extent of human expansion over the past year, and even she was impressed by how quickly Earth had established its presence throughout the galaxy. The psychological impact has been even more effective than direct military action, she explained to her staff during their weekly briefing. Most species are so terrified of human military capability that they're volunteering for authority, oversight before we even approach them. Her deputy, Major Rachel Stone, pointed to a section of the galactic map. What about the species that are resisting? The Andromedon League has been organizing opposition to our peacekeeping operations. Hayes pulled up detailed files on the Andromedon League, a coalition of 12 species that had publicly criticized human expansion. They're being careful not to take any direct action against us. They know what happened to the Korthok, but they're trying to build a coalition of resistance. Should we be concerned? Stone asked. Not really. The Andromedans are politicians, not warriors. They'll complain loudly, but they won't risk actual conflict with us. Besides, we have other ways of dealing with opposition. On the former Korthok, homeworld of Corvus Prime, Lieutenant Colonel Sam Mitchell was overseeing the final stages of the planet's rehabilitation program. The surviving Korthok population had been reduced to less than 10% of their original numbers, and those remaining were living under strict human supervision. The planet's capital city had been completely rebuilt according to human architectural standards. Where once there had been the organic, hive-like structures of Korthok society, now there were clean geometric buildings arranged in orderly patterns. The few remaining Korthok moved through their new environment like lost children, still confused. By their separation from the hive mind, the integration program is ahead of schedule, reported Captain Julie Adams, Mitchell's administrative officer. The Korthok survivors are adapting well to individual thinking patterns. Crime rates are essentially zero, and productivity is up 30% from pre-war levels. Mitchell nodded as he reviewed the statistics. What about their birth rates? Still declining? Dr. Rogers estimates that, without the hive mind to coordinate their breeding cycles, a Korthok population will stabilize at about 2% of historical levels. They'll survive as a species, but they'll never be numerous, enough to threaten anyone again. It was, Mitchell reflected, a perfect solution. The Korthok had been neutralized as a threat, without being completely exterminated. Earth could point to their survival as evidence of human mercy, while the galaxy could see what happened to species that chose war over cooperation. Back on Azuria, Ambassador Veltar was discovering the full extent of human control over his peoples. Lives. He sat in his office, reading through trade reports that showed how completely the Zilani economy had been integrated into Earth's expanding commercial empire. The numbers don't lie, his economic advisor Kalarsith said as she reviewed. The data. 70% of our exports now go to human-controlled systems. 80% of our imports come from Earth or human-allied worlds. We're completely dependent on them. Veltar stared out his window at the city below. Human vehicles moved through streets that had been redesigned according to human traffic patterns. Human soldiers patrolled areas that had once been purely Zilani neighborhoods. Human administrators worked in government buildings, ensuring that all local policies aligned with Earth's interests. What about our representation in the Confederation Council? He asked. The council still meets, Kalarsith replied, but all major decisions are reviewed by the Human Liaison Office before implementation. Councillor Nalvara tried to propose reducing human base allocations last month. Her proposal was rejected for security reasons. Veltar closed his eyes. The Zilani Confederation still existed on paper, but in practice, it had become a human client state. Every important decision was made with human approval. Every policy was designed to serve human interests. His people had freedom to make choices, as long as those choices aligned with Earth's plans. There's something else, Kalarsith said quietly. The Education Ministry is implementing new curriculum standards for our schools. All students will now be required to learn human history and political philosophy. The stated goal is improved cultural understanding between our species. The ambassador understood what that really meant. Within a generation, young Zilani would think more like humans than like their own people. They would see human dominance as natural and beneficial. They would never question the system that had replaced their independence with security. Dr. Helen Rogers was expanding her cultural integration programs throughout human-controlled space. From her research center on Terra Station, she coordinated efforts to reshape the thinking patterns of dozens of different species. The key is to avoid direct confrontation with existing cultural values, she explained to a group of human administrators. Instead, we gradually introduce concepts that make human leadership seem logical and beneficial. We're not conquering these species. We're helping them evolve. Her assistant, Dr. Kevin Brown, still seemed uncomfortable with the scope of the programs. What are some of the other species are starting to notice the changes in their societies? The Andromedon. League is calling it cultural warfare. Rogers shrugged. Let them complain. Cultural adaptation is a natural process. We're just guiding it in directions that promote galactic stability. In 50 years, the children of these species won't even remember what life was like before human protection. Admiral Clark received regular reports on the success of these integration programs, and he was pleased with the progress. The galaxy was becoming safer, more prosperous, and more stable under human guidance. Trade was increasing, conflicts were decreasing, and technological development was accelerating. Most importantly, no species had the capability to challenge human authority. 5 years after the end of the Korthak War, Admiral Ben Clark stood at the podium of the rebuilt Galactic Council chambers. Looking out at representatives from across known space, the chamber itself had been redesigned according to human architectural principles, with clean lines and efficient layouts that replaced the ornate decorations of the old order. Today marks the 5th anniversary of galactic peace, Clark announced to the assembled delegates. 5 years without major conflicts? 5 years of increasing prosperity? 5 years of successful cooperation between all member species of the Terran Peacekeeping Authority? The delegates applauded, though Clark noticed that some seemed more enthusiastic than others. Andromedan League representatives clapped politely, but without warmth. Several smaller species that had recently joined the Authority showed genuine enthusiasm. The difference, Clark knew, was between those who remembered independence and those who had grown up under human protection. The Authority now maintains security for over 200 star systems, Clark continued. Our peacekeeping fleets have prevented 17 potential conflicts through early intervention. Trade volume between member systems has increased by 400%. By any measure, the galaxy is safer and more prosperous than ever before. In the diplomatic section, President Veltar of the Zelani Confederation listened to the admirals' speech with mixed feelings. Everything Clark said was true. The galaxy was more peaceful and prosperous than it had been in centuries. The problem was that this peace had come at a price that most species were only beginning to understand. Our success has not gone unnoticed, Clark continued. Just last week, we received a request for assistance from the Outer Rim territories. The Vaxian Empire has begun aggressive expansion into neutral space, threatening several smaller species who lacked the military capacity to defend themselves. Veltar felt his heart sink. Another crisis, another opportunity for human expansion. He had seen this pattern repeat itself dozens of times over the past 5 years. An aggressive species would threaten weaker neighbors. Those neighbors would ask for human help, and the result would always be more systems under Terran Peacekeeping Authority control. The Authority will, of course, respond to these requests. For assistance, Clark announced. It cannot stand by while innocent populations face destruction. However, recent events have made it clear that our current approach needs to be expanded. The chamber fell silent. Even the most enthusiastic supporters of human leadership seemed nervous about what the Admiral might announce next. Effective? Immediately, the Terran Peacekeeping Authority will transition to a more proactive stance. Rather than waiting for conflicts to develop, we will take preventive action to ensure galactic stability. This will require expanded authority presence in border regions and enhanced coordination between member governments. Commander Maya Foster, now in charge of infrastructure development across human-controlled space, watched the Admiral's speech from her office on Terra Station. She was reviewing construction reports from dozens of worlds where human bases and facilities were being expanded to accommodate the new proactive peacekeeping policy. The Vaxian situation is perfect timing, she told her deputy, Captain Dan Brooks. We've been looking for an excuse to extend authority control into the Outer Rim. Those systems are rich in rare minerals that Earth industry needs. Brooks nodded as he reviewed the tactical assessments. The Vaxians have a decent fleet, but nothing compared to what we faced with the Korthak. Intelligence estimates we could neutralize their military capacity within 6 months. 6 months might be too long, Foster replied. Admiral Clark wants this resolved quickly to demonstrate authority effectiveness. We'll probably use the new psychological warfare protocols that Dr. Rogers has been developing. Dr. Helen Rogers was indeed working on new methods for dealing with aggressive species. Her research center had expanded significantly over the past 5 years, now employing hundreds of specialists in alien psychology and cultural manipulation. The key insight, she explained to her team during their weekly planning meeting, is that most species become aggressive because they feel threatened or insecure. If we can address those underlying psychological needs, we can often prevent conflicts without military action. Her lead researcher, Dr. Patricia Clark, pulled up files on the Voxian Empire. The Voxians seem to be expanding because their homeworld is overpopulated and their resources are depleted. They're not naturally aggressive, they're just desperate. Rogers smiled. Exactly. So instead of fighting them, we offer them what they need. New worlds to colonize, resource extraction rights, trade partnerships. In exchange, they accept authority oversight of their expansion activities. And if they refuse, asked another researcher, we demonstrate what happened to the Korthok Empire. Most species find our offer quite reasonable once they understand the alternative. On the former Korthok homeworld of Corvus Prime, the alternative was clearly visible. The planet had been transformed into a model colony that served as both a demonstration of human efficiency and a warning to potential opponents. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Mitchell, now governor of the Corvus Administrative Region, gave tours to visiting diplomats who wanted to see what human administration looked like in practice. The tours always followed the same route. It's designed to showcase the improvements human rule had brought to the former Korthok territory. As you can see, Mitchell told a group of Andromedon League representatives, the surviving Korthok population enjoys a higher standard of living than they ever had under their old empire. Crime is virtually non-existent. Education levels are up, and economic productivity has increased dramatically. The Andromedan delegates looked uncomfortable as they observed the orderly streets and efficient buildings. Everything was clean and functional, but there was something unsettling about the absolute conformity of the place. What about Korthok culture? Asked Delegate Zarbeth. Do they still practice their traditional customs? Mitchell's smile was practiced and professional. The Korthok have adapted their customs to fit their new circumstances. They've discovered that individual achievement can be just as satisfying as collective action. Many former Korthoks have become valuable contributors to human-led research projects. What Mitchell didn't mention was that adaptation had been carefully guided by human psychologists and cultural specialists. The surviving Korthok had been systematically separated from their old social structures and retrained to think in ways that aligned with human values. They were happy and productive, but they were no longer really Korthok in any meaningful sense. Back on Azuria, the Zilani homeworld was experiencing similar changes, though the process was more subtle. Young Zilani growing up under human influence thought differently than their parents. They saw human leadership as natural and beneficial. They spoke human languages as fluently as their native tongue. They dreamed of careers in human-dominated industries. Veltar's own daughter, Severin, was a perfect example of this transformation. She worked as a liaison officer between the Zilani government and the human administration, helping to coordinate policies between the two species. Father, she said during one of their weekly dinners, you worry too much about human influence? Look at what they've accomplished. We have peace, prosperity, opportunities we never had before. Why does it matter who makes the decisions as long as the results are good? Veltar looked at his daughter and saw a stranger. She spoke his language, but she thought like a human. She respected her heritage, but she served human interests. She was happy and successful, but she was no longer truly Zilani, because choices matter, he said quietly. Because the right to make our own mistakes is what makes us free. Severin laughed, a sound that reminded him painfully of her childhood. Freedom to make mistakes? Father, the Korthok War taught us what happens when species make their own choices without guidance. Millions died because nobody was strong enough to maintain order. The humans saved us from that chaos. Later that evening, Veltar walked through the streets of his capital city, observing the changes that 5 years of human administration had brought. The architecture was more efficient, the transportation systems worked better, the crime rate was essentially zero. By any objective measure, his people were better off than they had ever been, but they were also no longer his people in any way that mattered. They were junior partners in a human empire, grateful subjects who had traded their freedom for security and found the bargain satisfactory. The next morning brought news that Admiral Clark had predicted. The Vaxin Empire, faced with the choice between accepting authority assistance or facing military action, had agreed to join the Terran Peacekeeping Authority as a protected member state. The pattern was complete once again. Another crisis, another human intervention, another expansion of Earth's galactic influence. Within a few years, Veltar knew young Vasans would think just like his daughter did. They would see human guidance as natural and beneficial. They would never question the system that had replaced their independence with security. Commander, Maya Foster was already planning the infrastructure projects that would integrate Vaxian space into the human empire.